John Steinbeck once said, all war is a symptom of a man's failure as a thinking animal. Keep this in mind as we discuss today the recent developments as the United States will allow its European allies to export F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine and how that may change the course of the conflict, but also global security. My name is Dr. David Waradu,
And my name is Elizabeth Ann Stewart.
and you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Our show today is sponsored by Noble Gold.
Also, we're tracking new developments overnight as Ukraine may be getting one step closer to receiving those U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets.
Those American F-16s would be joining so many other weapons already provided by the U.S. and its allies.
U.S. announcement that F-16 fighter jets can now be supplied to Ukraine by America's allies.
Why should Americans continue to care and continue to pay for Ukraine's
Senior
war?
Russian official warning of, quote, colossal risks if the West supplies Ukraine with F-16s.
All right. What are we going to cover in this one here, Elizabeth? Because there are a lot of moving parts, but the big concern that comes with this is this another sign for an escalation of the war?
David, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of moving parts to this situation, but I think the scariest part is that this does seem to be an escalation. And I think the biggest concern right now is you have other countries that are really trying to work for peace in the Ukraine situation. And then you have the US that seems to be trying to escalate it even further. If you want, let's go to this clip of Joe Biden talking, the president of the United States, talking to a reporter about this situation. So let's
And this
listen
one
in for a
was, by the
second.
way, just for our viewers to know, that was on the sidelines after the conclusion of the G7 summit in Hiroshima, Japan.
And of all places, Hiroshima, I feel that that's some place that you should really sit and think about what the consequences of your actions and the consequences of war really are. So let's take a listen.
Thank you all very, very much. Appreciate it. It is for them.
So in this clip, basically, Biden is asked whether this is a colossal risk, and he says it is to them.
Yeah, that's problematic. That is very problematic for many reasons. I can just state at least one or two.
Right.
I can approach it from a global security aspect of it, because here is what it means. Putting my geopolitical analyst hat on, it means now that, first of all, before we delve even deeper into this, who's going to be flying those fighter jets? Ukrainians are not trained for that, so they need to be trained. How long does it take to train a fighter jet for F-16s? At least 3 or 4 years.
Right.
Which means what? It means that now the conflict is going to be extended for another 4 years. That's the one
Or
concern.
someone else is going to fly them.
Exactly. And second thing has to do with the moment someone else flies them. Let's say members of NATO, like Poland or let's say Denmark or some other country. That means automatically that NATO now is in a direct war with Russia. That means if NATO is in, that means the United States is in as well. And this is no way for sort of de-escalating, rather it's escalating the conflict to the next level. Russia is going to react because now you'll be dealing with air superiority.
Yeah.
And this is where the concern that when I listened to the conference after the G7, and when I heard that, I was just shaking my head. Who is advising the president? Which is very concerning. Very, very, very concerning.
And now a word from our sponsor. There's no denying it. Gold is hot right now. Prices are soaring and experts are predicting even more to come. Not so long ago, gold reached its all-time high of $2,069 an ounce, and now it's inching ever close to that number again. Bank of America, one of the largest banks in the world, is saying gold will rise even further still to over $2,200 an ounce later this year. So what, right? Well, Gold is already a safety net for your hard-earned money. And now, when the stock market is all over the place and the value of the dollar is uncertain, being safe really counts like never before. Noble Gold is offering a 5-ounce America the Beautiful coin for any qualified IRA or old 401k rollover. Terms apply. A solid silver US Mint issued coin celebrating our national parks, free with every qualifying precious metal IRA or 401k rollover. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold Investments. Call them at 877-646-5347 or visit them online at geopoliticsgold.com. geopoliticsgold.com. There's always a risk of investment and there's no guarantee of any kind.
It is very concerning. And I want to dive even deeper into this topic because we have China that has just sent a very senior official to both Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine specifically right now, to try and talk peace. And I think that's a very interesting dimension to this because we have please forgive me if I pronounce this wrong. And if you guys want to help me figure out how to pronounce it in the comments, I would very much appreciate it. Li Wei.
Yes, yeah, you're correct.
So he's now visiting Ukraine, but he didn't visit Ukraine out of nowhere. Zelenskyy asked President Xi, Chinese President Xi, for a call. And during that call, enough was said that China now sent a delegate to try and foster peace. And he's not the only one.
That is correct. That is correct. Because even the Saudis, believe it or not, the Saudis, which, by the way, in Saudi Arabia, where the 32nd Arab League summit just concluded yesterday, they invited the president, comedian Zelenskyy, to attend it. Yeah, he's not an Arab, and yet they invited him. And the reason they invited him, because the Arab League decided to also give the platform to a Russian president to address the Arab League, and also the Chinese president, President Xi. So when asked as to what was the reason why President comedian Zelenskyy was invited, the Saudis response that they wanted to listen to both sides, to both ends of the arguments, because they want to foster peace into the breaking a peace between Ukraine and Russia. That is the reason why he was invited physically there.
That's huge, David. That's huge because that's not something that's being reported here in the West at all.
Not at all.
So what are the ramifications really of that situation?
Well, first of all, if you noticed, the Arab League gave the platform to Russia, gave the platform to China, and gave the platform to even Ukraine. Who was not invited to address the Arab League?
Right. The U.S.
The U.S. and Europe, basically. None of them were invited. So what does it mean? There is a message, subtle message there. That means now the center for where peace is going to be sort of initiated from or launched by, it's not in the West anymore. Now it's in the East, especially in this case with China, with Ukraine. But they highlight how much now that the Arab League are moving away from the U.S. How so, you may ask? Here is another shell bomb that was taken there. What was it? Is that the Arab League invited the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad and being readmitted to the Arab League after being expelled since 2011.
That's huge.
It is
also huge.
And as a matter of fact, the moment that the Saudis announced the invitation of the president of Syria, the United States, the White House issued a statement saying that they condemn this action and they're going to even consider imposing sanctions on countries that will reestablish ties with Syria. It tells you right there, even Arab League is considering and thinking in terms of the decline of the U.S. influence in the Middle East. What makes, even if I may add something for our viewers, just to put this within the global context, within the same time frame. When I say time frame, I'm referring to the last week and a half or so. Russia and Iran, Russia and Iran decided to establish a railroad that will link Astana to Tashkent, which is from Russia to Iran, basically. Why is this? Because this is going to now rival the Suez Canal when it comes down to economics.
And that's huge too. Like, that's a giant economic move.
Yeah, it is. It is because the Middle East now is seeing the change. You're looking at Saudis now pivoting already east. You're looking at the United Arab Emirates pivoting east. You know, some Iraq now is ditching the dollar and using the Chinese yuan. The Saudis doing the same. Iran is doing the same. As a matter of fact, Iran already had an agreement with China for 25 years. And Qatar, which is like the third largest gas producer, just signed the 27-year deal with China, not Europe.
Right.
So it just shows you that the shift in geopolitics is moving east. And this is why when you hear a statement by President of the United States like this about, well, the big loss is going to be for them, it shows you right there. We don't have a strategy in place. We don't have a foreign policy that is well structured, that addresses really the fundamental core issues. We seem to be just reacting from one to another. But for me personally, the way I see it, by having the United States agreeing to this F-16 deliveries per se, and as I said earlier, it takes 3 to 4 years to train a pilot. That means the intention of the United States is to drag this conflict for at least 4 more years.
You know, I was talking to someone the other day about, and this was, you know, this person is a veteran, and, you know, we were talking about Afghanistan, and we were talking about the fact that, you know, this just unfortunately is reality. The United States has been in a conflict the entire time I've been alive. So it's been one after another, after another, after another. And we asked ourselves the question, if Ukraine ended, what would be the next, right? The next conflict's already being set up as Taiwan. But what would happen if we just didn't have another conflict, right? So what conflicts have we had, right? So we've had over the last several years, mostly it's been Middle East and now it's Ukraine. Yeah. But what would it be like if we just didn't have another conflict?
If only live in peace, right?
Right. I just want to say that I think that that's something that a lot of the rest of the world is sort of interested in, not having this continue to be a conflict. And now we're looking basically at Middle Eastern countries saying, we would like to give a platform to everyone in service of peace. And now we're also watching China and Zelenskyy. You know, we actually talked about this. We did an analysis of this about, I don't know, maybe a month ago, where we talked about Zelenskyy actually speaking out and saying, China, please come. We are open. We are open to having you talk to us. And now here we are. I think it's about a month. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but we did the live stream on that topic, and people were very, very interested because the Western media wasn't talking about it at all. And so now what we're looking at is China stepping in, but Biden isn't addressing that also in this situation, right? So he's just looking at the next set of weapons to bring in. And quite frankly, I think it's very reasonable for people to be concerned that that's an escalation. And the reporter themselves, when they asked the question, what did they say? They said it was a colossal.
That would be a colossal
risk to the West.
To the West,
and Biden said, oh, it's a risk for them. Well,
And,
there is
yeah.
no risk for one without the other. Do we think that Russia is just going to sit back and say, okay, well, they can just have those
Yeah.
F-16s. That's okay. It's not one-sided. And it's very frustrating to me that it's being addressed in that way by the White House. It's being addressed as, well, it's just going to be for them. No, it's not.
Yeah. You're right. To go back to your point, just for why the conflicts keep coming, because that decision was made right after World War II. To be specific, it was in early 50s. From the 1952, the decision was made back then to move forward with the military-industrial complex as far as being engaged in conflict, but not winning wars. I mean, you
Right.
look at history, and there is a record for it. Well, what did we have in the 50s? We had the Korean War. What was after it in the 60s? The Vietnam.
Vietnam,
Then,
yeah.
then Gulf One, Gulf Two, Afghanistan. Now is Ukraine, and the next is Taiwan. You can just see. And the whole objective was never to win a war, because it wasn't even a war to begin with. The one
Right.
we got involved in Vietnam and all that, it wasn't declared war. We got into invasion of Iraq. It wasn't a declared war, and Iraq didn't have a weapon of mass destruction. We all knew it was just a lie, but that's not the point. The point is that it was always perceived to be the dragging the conflict longer. I spent time in Afghanistan. I was on the ground, and my first time arriving there in 2002, I was like, this is not a winnable war anyway, if it is
Right.
a war, because it ain't gonna happen. And here we are. We spent 20 years. What did we get out of it? Nothing. The same thing with Iraq, and I see the same patterns going on right now with the declaration like this from President Biden that suggests the conflict in Ukraine, it's gonna be dragged longer than anticipated. This is why the White House was shocked to find out that Zelenskyy was invited
Right.
by the Saudis, because the Saudis want to give him a platform like they did for the Russian president, because he addressed the league via video conferencing. And the reason, when they asked the foreign minister, Al-Fahan bin Saud in Saudi Arabia, they asked him why. He said, we wanted to listen to both sides.
What a novel concept.
Exactly, because that's something we refused when China introduced the peace plan, 12 points, and I read them, and they are sort of a realistic approach. They're not asking for the impossible. They were asking what's real, basically. And the US rejected it the moment it became public.
Right.
So, and Europeans, well, Europeans, how weak they are. They can do nothing about it anyway.
Right.
This is why. And I found this interesting, because I always follow when it comes down to summit. The one thing that I always keep an eye on is the final communique or the statement.
Yeah.
And when I read the statement of the G7 in Hiroshima, what was the main theme about it? Is impose more sanctions on Russia and challenge China in trade balances and so forth. Which the two makes you think, is China and Russia the only two entities that exist in this world?
That's a great question.
I know. And the second thing, Elizabeth, you know what it is? G7, what is supposed to be about? Economics. Right. Not a global security. It's about economics. And yet they have shifted. Even the principles of what G7 was all about when it was established has now shifted into some other direction to serve the interest, for example, of NATO, the US, the expansion, and so forth. This is why, as a matter of fact, today, and I did find it, I don't know if it was a report. I'm not in the United States, I'm overseas, and I don't know if it was reported there or not, that China today has summoned the Japanese ambassador in Beijing because of the statements that was in the communique, the final communique of G7. So it tells you the story right there. It just tells you right there. We don't have foreign policy sort of professionals that truly understand and have the depth of what geopolitics and what foreign policy is all about. Because we seems to me personally, again, my personal opinion, to me it appears that we just reacting to events. They just figure something on the fly and deal with it. And foreign policy doesn't work that way. Diplomacy doesn't work that way. You have to have a strategy, and the strategy has to be for a long term. You don't think about next quarter, you think about the next 15, 20 years.
Right.
And we don't seem to have that at all. And this is an example of where I see the danger of something like this statement President Biden said. It's only going to aggravate the situation. We're already dealing with the issue at home. It has to do with the debt ceiling.
Right. And the debt ceiling is the big conversation piece right now, because the debt ceiling, we have a pretty big problem here with that.
Yeah. And most Americans have, I won't use the term have no clue. It's just they are too distracted to even understand the implications of what it means if we default, once again.
Right.
And I'm bringing it to our viewers to know. 2 days ago, China sold about $482 million of treasury bills. They want to get rid of that. And they are converting it, to what? Gold.
Yep.
Yeah. So that tells me right there, because finance and geopolitics, they always go hand in hand.
Geopolitics is finance, right? So we think about it, right? It is finance. We think about it like it's two different things. Like, oh, there's finance, and then there's geopolitical security. But the reality is, why are all these wars happening? Why is there such a need for security? It's because of the economics behind it. Right? So we need to secure our interests. We need to make sure that there's fuel for the fire, right? If you're having a recession, for example, what is one of the best ways out of a recession? War.
War, usually, because that's how you make it up for. And this is now more and more are saying, is this why the US is pushing for? For us as a citizens, it is our duty to speak up. Yes, we might not be able to change. Washington is as stubborn as it can be. At least I remember when I was working there. But at least for us, and the whole purpose of this channel is to raise awareness. That is the whole purpose for it, because we want to ensure that people understand what the core issues are. Of course, they reach their own conclusions. They reach we can't, and I refuse to be to influence somebody's thinking as no. I'll provide the information to the best of our abilities.
Right. We provide analysis to the best of our abilities.
Exactly.
I can tell you, I think that it's very, very telling that, over the last couple of months, Zelenskyy, we had the leak, right? I don't know whether it was a real leak or not, but we had the leak. And one of the things that it said basically was that the United States was spying on Zelenskyy. And now we have, just little drips, right? And you have to pay attention to these little drips of information that come out and start putting them together. And you have to put them together for yourself, right? We're not necessarily 100% correct. Nobody is. We're not in those rooms. We're not making those decisions. So, and now we're starting to see, remember, David, when China did come out with its 12-point plan, when it did come out with its 12-point plan, and the US said, absolutely not.
Yeah, right away. They didn't even give a chance to even read it. They didn't even want to listen to it. Let's first read it, study it, and we can respond.
Right.
We even didn't do that.
But then they said, China is never going to be able to broker that. But what did Zelenskyy do after that? He made a specific statement to Beijing that he was open to that. And now he asked for the call. This was last month. I think this was in April.
That's correct.
Last month that Zelenskyy asked for that call with President Xi. And now we have the delegate there. And now we have, so it's interesting. And now we have the other summit that they were also part of, right? That the United States was not part of. And so it's very interesting to sort of watch these steps start to happen because, the US says absolutely not, but then, and this is a question that I have. I don't have the answer to this, but the question is, does Washington know that Zelenskyy is doing this ahead of time? And what is, are they just playing absolutely not when they're secretly saying it's okay? Or is Zelenskyy doing this behind Washington's back?
If I am to answer this, I would say he won't be able to do it behind the U.S. back because the spying part, it's the norm. We've been doing it since 1945 on all allies. It's nothing new. They do the same. That's just the norm. Where the challenge is going to be, it's because the United States does not want another entity to be able to broker a peace. This is why, for example, when China brokered the peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran, did you know what it did to the Middle East? Do you know how many countries now are reconsidering their relations, their diplomatic relations with Iran? The latest is Egypt. Egypt now is in talks with Iran about reestablishing their diplomatic relations. Iran is going to be opening its embassy in Saudi Arabia soon. Saudi Arabia is going to be investing inside Iran. You can't just, all those dynamics that suggest to you the decline of U.S. influence in the Middle East. And the case of the Ukraine, it's no different. That's again, and I repeat this is why Saudis invited Zelenskyy physically to attend there. And he addressed the league because they are hoping to broker peace, a deal that is not a peace, but a deal between Russia and Ukraine. Before I forget to share this with our viewers, one of the classified info that came out of the leak, you know what was? It was that Ukraine, the intelligence services in Ukraine, were planning on blowing up a pipeline in Hungary. Why Hungary? Because Hungary still gets oil from Russia. And they wanted to, that's how crazy things can get. And because Hungary is a NATO ally, so basically Ukraine would be targeting a NATO member. That shows you also with Ukraine, it's hard to trust them. You can't trust them. So, but now the reality on the ground is changing, especially now with the fall of Bakhmut.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a reality is changing. Whether the West likes it or not is irrelevant.
Right. So do you want to listen to what Zelenskyy himself, President Zelenskyy himself, says about the fall of Bakhmut?
Sure.
Because it's a very interesting, and obviously English is not his first language, so we do have to have some leeway for that. But his answer is very interesting and a little bit hard to. It reminds me actually of a speech that I think it was Reagan who gave. And in the speech, his administration had been trading weapons for hostages, right? And he came out and said, "Oh no, this isn't happening." Well, turns out reporters got him, and turns out it was happening. And he said, "Well, in my heart, I don't believe this is true, but the facts tell me it is." And so it kind of sounds like this.
Mr. President, doesn't Zelenskyy, is Bakhmut still in Ukraine's hands? The Russians say they've taken Bakhmut.
I think no. But you have to understand that there is nothing. They destroyed everything. There are no buildings. It's a pity, it's tragedy, but for today, Bakhmut is only in our hearts. There is nothing on this place. So just ground and a lot of dead Russians, but they came to us. So that defenders in Bakhmut, they did strong work. And of course, we appreciate great job.
Doesn't that remind you of a different speech you've heard before?
Yeah, that's true. So the idea of as a matter of fact, for Bakhmut, I did listen to the head of Wagner speech. He was in Russian. I don't speak Russian, but I listened to what he said. And usually that's when they declared that they took over, and they received congratulatory words from President Putin on that. It's very strategic, of course, as you may know. Why Bakhmut? Because it's in the northeast part of Donbass, I believe, and it's very, very strategic. I had access to a map that shows from 2021 all the way to May 2020, today, 2023. And it shows how the space of Bakhmut was shrinking when they took over. So it was very interesting to see that one. And this is, you put all this development, like what we just talked about right now, all of this, you put them within the context of, why will a US president, Biden in this case, will be stating something like that he knows fundamentally, not only it's wrong, but he knew that it could really turn things ugly for the worse for everybody, not just for them, the Russians, it's for everybody.
Well, I think a very interesting piece of information as you're asking this, because we're talking specifically about the F-16 fighters here, but during this G7 summit, there was a lot of very interesting things that were said. And one of them is that, this actually comes as Biden unveils a new, I think it's $370 million military aid package for Ukraine. So that's, again, upping the number of dollars that we have sent to Ukraine in support. And it's interesting that, we consider sending weapons as, this really big problem, this really big thing, but sending money seems like it's less of an infraction, right? Because they could hypothetically be using this money for many different things. But, we're looking at, Biden still has to sell this to some extent to the American people. And if the narrative starts to fall apart, right? So like if the American people actually see the rest of the world is trying to broker peace, that overall, we've gotten comments before that, Americans are, bad and hold all these terrible, views of the rest of the world. To be clear, the American people have been taught to think that this is not bad people here. Overall, people here want peace. And I think, wherever you are in the world, I think that's something very important to understand, is that, all of this information about other countries trying to step into this situation, because I think this is just my opinion, but my opinion is that other countries see how dangerous this is actually getting. And that this isn't just some, podunk conflict with some nothing country, right? This is a conflict with basically Russia and China in their own sense, right? Because we're looking at Taiwan next. So the US isn't taking on a small country. The US are taking on these like kind of big behemoths. And I think the rest of the world is trying to calm that situation down, because they know something like nuclear war isn't just going to affect Russia, for example. Nuclear war affects the entire world. And I said this before in the show, but I think that Hiroshima, of all places, that should really make them think about what's at risk, what's at stake. Because it's not just what's at stake for, a couple of companies making extra billions of dollars to sell more weapons or to get more power. I mean, what's at stake is our planet. What's at stake is our world the way that we know it. And sending us back into the Stone Age, I don't care what your reason is, that's not okay to dive us back into basically the Stone Age. And so, some of the other things that were said, so Zelenskyy urged the Western allies to ensure that Russia is the last aggressor. I mean, is that how the policy has run, where, this is going to be the last conflict, the last aggressor?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not how, unfortunately, I wish human beings didn't go for war and conflict, but unfortunately it seems to be part of humanity in some way.
And it's not, he's not, Zelenskyy himself doesn't understand politics very, very well. He was a comedian. I mean, no offense to, I'm not making fun of the guy. It's just, you don't expect that transition from being a comedian to dealing with the world event. World events are very complicated by nature, because when you're dealing with world events, whatever country you represent, you have to think in terms of the interest of the country, of course. And those interests, they sometimes collide with others, and you have to figure out a way.
Right.
This is where the art of diplomacy comes in. Unfortunately, I don't see any qualified diplomats in Washington for the last 20 years or so. Even when I was there, I wasn't convinced about, because we dealt with certain issues where I was asked, at least I was there during the conversations and all that, and I kind of didn't understand how much those individuals, the officials that are representing the U.S., truly have a grasp of what the issues are.
Right.
And it was unfortunate for, and this is where my big concern is. Statement like this by President Biden, he doesn't I don't know, he does understand or not. It's I don't know. It's just the implications of it long term.
Yeah.
That is where the big concern.
To
And
me, go ahead.
I was going to say, I hope whomever is advising him will take stand and say, sir, no, this is not the right course of action, because it will have ramifications not only over there, but over here as well. In addition to having serious issues we need to deal with at home, it doesn't make sense to, but you would expect this from both political parties in the American system.
Right. And to me, it feels it felt so blasé in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, of course it's going to be for them, like with no real understanding of what he's saying. And it really, it really could be a big consequence. And you can hear it in the journalist's voice, the journalist who asked him, you can hear it in their voice that they think that it's very serious, that he's saying this is very serious, that, that he's talking about these F-16 fighters in this way. And, and you're absolutely right. This either means that because it takes so long to train people on this, either they're planning on having it be a very long time, or they're planning on somebody else flying them. And both have very severe, very real consequences, specifically to the people of Ukraine, but to the rest of the world.
It's because basically for the pilots, the way, as a former military, the way I think about it, if I put myself in that setting and think, those pilots basically will be on a suicide mission. That's what it would be. Because if they fly those, they are not coming back. That's the sad reality of it. So,
well, and I think more than anything, this feels like a political statement, right? More than anything, it feels like a statement. Doing this feels like, I don't know what to call it other than an escalation. I don't know what the other reason could possibly be for this situation, is that, they would like to end this conflict in a particular way or continue escalating this conflict. I don't know what their intention is for that. But I can tell you that it isn't keeping the status quo, and it isn't de-escalating the situation. no matter what, it's not de-escalating the situation. Russia didn't sit there and say, okay, well, if you guys are doing this, then I guess we'll just back off. And I'm not saying that what Putin is doing is right. I don't believe that either. I think that war under any circumstance is very bad for everyone involved. So to be very clear, I do not support what Putin is doing.
But we did the one who created the issue to begin with.
Yes.
We triggered that one. We'll say it straightforward. It's because the expansion of NATO wasn't supposed to go all the way to Russia's doorsteps.
Right.
That was the second thing is when Russia presented its security concerns, the West didn't even respond to them. Didn't even look at them.
Mm-hmm.
They did presented a list of their security concerns, and one of them was about the expansion all the way to eastward. Because just reality, as one who did the research on my Russia book, and I detailed this kind of stuff because I had to research it. I always was convinced that should ever military presence in Ukraine, Russia is not going to tolerate that because of security concerns.
Right.
Yeah, that's around the periphery of Russia. And of course, NATO ignored that like we did after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. That's why we expanded in 1994, 1998, and 2004.
Right.
So, and that's why they reacted. So, of course, nobody wants to see that. Who wants to, especially for Ukrainian people?
Right.
It's the people that end up suffering the most.
Right.
Like always in any conflict. I've seen it in Iraq. I've seen it in Afghanistan. I've seen it in Yemen. It's devastating for people, for the average. And that's sad reality. But yeah, a statement like this by President Biden is only escalate things, makes it even worse.
Right.
And I don't even know if he's aware of what he's saying or not. But that's
I don't either. And, we've heard from politicians, and, I'm not saying this is true of Joe Biden. I don't know him. So I don't know whether this is true of him or not. But, we've heard from politicians before, I think, like Madeleine Albright, talking about it being an acceptable level of casualty. And I think to most people, there is no real acceptable level of casualty. When you're looking at a human being, what is the real acceptable level of casualty? And to me, that's 0 people. There is no acceptable level of casualty because you're looking at real people. You're looking at real mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, children and parents. You're looking at real humans. You're looking at real people. And so to me, this was very disheartening. Like it hurt my heart to watch him say this in this way, because it felt so callous. Like it felt so uncaring for the struggles that the people are really going for, and very insensitive to the fact that this might very much escalate this situation even further.
Well, let's hope that the initiatives by both China and Saudi Arabia will yield some positive results in the right direction, and at least initiate the conversation towards settling this conflict once for all. Fingers crossed for all that. So, Any final thoughts for this before we close this out, Elizabeth?
That's it. This is a topic that is very interestingly complex, because this isn't, and the way that it's being reported in different parts of the world is very interesting, because a lot of information is being left out. And when there's information left out like that, it's always worth it to dig deeper and do your own research.
Yeah. Well, maybe this we can do it in a live stream. What do you guys think? Leave us a comment on this if you like us to do an expansion on this topic. We extend on it in a live stream conversation. I'll be happy to do it. So, well, we hope you find this very informative. By the way, if this is your first time landing on this channel, please make sure to subscribe, and hit the like button so you can further with the algorithm, as you may know how it works. So we hope you find it very informative, and we look forward to seeing you next time. As always, prepare yourself for a change in the world order. Till next time, guys. Bye-bye.